When I painted Big Daddy Cough Cough, there was a pretty hard deadline. I had to get one of the biggest, most extravagant models in all of Warhammer 40k assembled and painted in 2 days, ready to start filming the first 40k in 40 seconds tournament. And there's no way I would have been able to do that without an airbrush. Before you click out of the video, because airbrushes are the devil's work, I'm also going to show you how to paint the Fever Dream scheme without one. With the exception of Tau being left out in the sun, Death Guard are the stinkiest faction in all of 40k. The Blessings of Nurgle have also been known to cause hallucinations, and that's an idea I really liked. What would a Death Guard look like to a guardsman that was tripping balls? Well, let's find out. We're going to start off with the airbrush first, and through that I'm shooting Regal Blue from the Army Painter Fanatic line. This is going to start us off with a few things. The biggest one is going to be basically giving us an interesting color inside all the shadows. And from there I'm going to jump into Wicked Pink. Now I'm holding the model at a really steep angle because I want a traditional zenithal. That means all we're doing is spraying from the top down. So we're going to leave that blue in all the recesses from the underside, and then everything on top is going to be that Wicked Pink. Which means everything in the middle is going to become a gradient between that pink and blue, and this is one of the big plus sides for the airbrush. Keeping with the semi-zenithal action, we're going to take Burning Ore because I want to superheat this magenta and take it into a slightly orange direction. And again, the big pro with the airbrush is it's going to create that gradient between the pink and the orange for us. Now I have Pixie Pink loaded up, and we're going to start looking at all the highest points and some of the transitions that we want. Layering all these different colors and these different tones of the same color is really going to help to push some contrast when we get into the next step. And that next step is Hot Pink from the Army Painter Air range. Shooting this over the pinks that we already have is going to resaturate them and make them feel a lot brighter, but it's also going to turn all those oranges and the really light pinks into a supernova heat. And now we can start to add some of that underglow with Electric Lime. This is probably one of my favorite greens. What we're doing here is the exact opposite of the zenithal. So instead of holding it at that steep angle and shooting down, we're going to hold it at the opposite steep angle and shoot up. And because this is a pretty strong glow, we want to catch quite a bit of the model here. So you can see with the cape how it's kind of sweeping up into the pink. On the legs, it's going to catch all of that underside detail as well as some of the actual mid-tone plates. And because we want to unify this whole scheme, I'm also going to shoot a little bit around the head and the underside of the shoulders. Jumping back into the air range, we're going to pick up Guass Green. Now this is just a neon fluorescent green. And with this, we're going to start to cover all those areas of the Electric Lime and a little bit of the spillover to kind of start to blur those transitions. Once that's done, we're going to take Afterglow and pick out some spotlights. Now this is where the light is going to be the strongest, which means we're going to be aiming for the feet and all the lower details. Because this is the Fever Dream scheme and not so much real world lighting, we can kind of get away with a little bit more here. Back to the air range for Neon Yellow, we're going to blend that Afterglow back into the rest of the glow that we've set. Because fluorescent paints are usually pretty thin and transparent in nature, we're going to use this to our advantage and blend everything back into each other. It means you can overshoot a little bit and you'll get that gradual color gradient kind of fall down. Keep that in mind for the future because that is a really good tip anytime you try and do OSL with an airbrush. Now we're going to finish up with some of those details using a traditional brush. We're going back to that royal blue. And with this, we're just going to add some spots of color. So all the tentacle and the gooey bits that are cracking out of the armor, and then all the cracks and the divots in the armor itself. Given that the base of this game is two incredibly vibrant colors, the blue here is really going to pop out all of those little details. As much as I'm shooting for the idea of visual confusion with those two colors coming in from opposite directions, we still want this model to be readable. And to help with that, I'm going to use Bright Sapphire to highlight those blue areas. After that, I'm going to grab Terrestrial Titan, which is a dark purple, and I'm going to start dark lining some of the deepest recesses. Again, this is just to give us a little bit more separation in some of the details so it's readable for the eye. And the reason I went for a dark purple here is, one, it goes with all the colors that we have on the model, and two, I didn't want to go to straight black because that would be a little bit too harsh. Jumping back into the same afterglow color that we used with the airbrush, I'm just going to start edge highlighting some of the brightest and the highest details. And with all of those details done, we can move on to the dry brush. For this, I'm actually going to start off with some speed paints. Just like we laid down the blue with the airbrush, I want to lay down some colors as a base coat to make it more interesting. Starting off with familiar pink on the top half, I'm then going to move into Tidal Wave blue and start to wet blend the two together. If you haven't wet blended before, or you've never heard of wet blending, it's literally taking two paints and mixing them together on the model, in the same way that you would mix two different colors on the palette. Using that same idea, we're going to take Ghillie Dew and start applying that to the legs, and of course we're going to then wet blend that back into the Tidal Wave blue. After letting our speed paints dry, we're finally moving on to the dry brush. Now I like to take a little bit of water and soak that up into the bristles so we don't get a chalky finish. So dry brushes aren't actually that dry. Now, usually with dry brushing, you want to try and take as much paint off as you can because you only want this soft powdering to kind of coat the edges. But I'm going to do a very, very heavy dry brush here, and the reason for that is these are Death Guard. I want to create texture. The extra splotchiness, patches, and the inconsistencies here are actually going to help the effect more than hinder it. The colors that I'm using for this is Doomfire Drab, which is a really light pink, mixed with some afterglow. And because we have all of those speed paint colors in there as our shadows, you can go ham on this. Once that's dry, we're going back into the air range to pick up that hot pink again. Just like I was saying when we're doing the airbrush version, fluorescent paints are incredibly transparent, so this is going to take a couple of coats. But what we get to do here is build up the saturation in different areas, and because we now have the dry brush edges, they're going to be incredibly light on top, and all those deepest, darkest recesses are going to stay that same color. And for the bottom half, I've actually gone straight to the neon yellow. Because we've already laid down the greens, it's actually going to appear more green than yellow. Now the really cool thing is, if we take that neon yellow and apply it over the pink, we actually get our orange. Which, yes, does make it a little bit harder to build a gradient between the two in the middle, but it also does actually add a little bit more interest. After that, we're going to do the same steps back with the royal blue and then the bright sapphire and pick out all of those little nicks and scratches and all the gooey parts in between the armor that are oozing out. And we're doing this for the exact same reason. We're using the same color palette, but we're using different techniques. After that, I've grabbed some Wicked Pink and we're going to start painting the tongue. The tongue is going to be a really, really simple one. We're going Wicked Pink, Pixie Pink, and then just a little bit of that Doomfire Drab mixed into the Pixie Pink, just for the highest highlights. The only details really left on this one are the horns and the teeth, and for that I started with Ancient Stone, which is just a really nice, warm, creamy color. For this particular model, I've decided to do this a little bit thinner than I usually would because I want some of the other colors to pop through. That's actually going to make the shadows feel a little bit more interesting. And then on the highest highlights, I've jumped straight to Ice Yellow. And after that, we're done. While we've used the same idea and the exact same colors, we've used two different tools which have given us two different results. It's not a question of is the airbrush better than dry brush or vice versa. It's more about what do you like, what do you want to happen, what did you try to achieve with your paint job. As always, a massive thank you to the Army Painter, in-games and our Patreons for keeping the channel going. Hit that like and subscribe and we'll see you next time.